You remember the notebook? Not a digital contact list, not a backed up cloud file. A physical object, probably with a frayed spiral binding or a faded cover, where names and 7-digit phone numbers lived in your own messy handwriting. That notebook was the only thing anchoring you to your world. If you lost it, or forgot to write down a number before someone moved, they didn't just leave your neighborhood, they left your reality. If you were born between 1976 and 1985, you grew up in the last era of human history where disappearing was a normal, quiet part of life. Since our last 2 videos, I've read thousands of your comments. Actually read them. One of you wrote about a flood of memory that came rushing back from touching an old shirt, the kind you had as a kid. Several others mentioned carrying the faces of people they haven't seen in 30 years with a clarity that surprised them. And underneath almost all of it, the same quiet pattern kept surfacing, a low-grade grief that doesn't quite attach to anything you can point to. That's what today is about. We've talked about why you feel older than you are and how your brain is wired for a world that no longer exists. But today, we're going somewhere more personal, the people you lost. Not to tragedy or conflict, but to the simple, brutal, analog fade. Think back to those long afternoons skating to the 7-Eleven just to see who was there. You didn't text to check in, you didn't share a live location, you just showed up. And whoever was there was your whole world for the next 3 hours. There's a specific psychological quality to those interactions that's been quietly stripped away, what researchers call situational intimacy. Every conversation you had in 1994 existed in a true liminal space. Because there was no recording device in your pocket and no digital trail of your location, your interactions were completely unrepeatable, known only by the people in that room, on that street corner, in that parking lot. This gave you something real, information sovereignty. You owned your moments because nobody else was indexing them. When you talked to a friend for 3 hours on a landline, tethered to a wall by a curly cord, that conversation became part of your internal architecture. Your memory of that person isn't a static profile picture, it's a proprioceptive memory, the sound of their voice, the specific quiet of your bedroom at 11 p.m., the weight of the silence between sentences. Those moments were priceless, precisely because they weren't recorded. And when that friend moved away or changed schools, you didn't just lose them. You became the sole custodian of a shared history that now exists in exactly one place. That's not nostalgia. That's a specific form of cognitive isolation. Here's where it gets precise. In 1989, grief researcher Kenneth Doka identified a pattern he called disenfranchised grief. It describes grief that society doesn't formally recognize. Losses without a ceremony, a week off work, or a neighbor showing up with food. Losses you're expected to absorb quietly and move on from. The loss of a pre-digital friendship fits this framework almost exactly. Nobody told you to grieve the kid from 7th grade when his family moved to another state. There was no cultural script for it. You just got on with things. But your brain didn't, because unresolved social bonds don't quietly close themselves. Psychologists call this the Zeigarnik effect, the mind's documented tendency to keep processing incomplete situations far longer than resolved ones. You're not haunted by the friends you properly said goodbye to. You're haunted by the ones who just vanished because your brain never received the signal that the story was over. For Xennials specifically, there could be dozens of these open loops, maybe hundreds. There's another layer here that almost nobody talks about. Psychologists use the term spontaneous propinquity to describe how friendships form not through shared interests or matching algorithms, but through the sheer frequency of unplanned, low-stakes physical encounters. Xennials were built on this. You didn't schedule a hangout with a stated purpose. You just existed in the same physical space as your peers, the park, the record store, that 7-Eleven parking lot, and the friendship happened because you kept showing up. These were your liminal friendships, not your deepest relationships, but the ones that made the world feel populated and safe. You knew the guy at the pizza place, the group that always hung out by the arcade. Their presence was social infrastructure you never had to think about. The algorithm killed the liminal friend. Now every interaction is intentional. You reach out with a specific reason. You comment on a post to engage. The spontaneous thing that used to happen just because you were in the same room has been replaced by semantic flattening because the physical effort to reach someone is now zero. Your brain struggles to assign real emotional weight to the connection. And here's the cruelest part. Today, nobody truly disappears. You have zombie contacts, people from 15 years ago whose birthdays surface in your calendar, whose vacation photos haunt your feed. Your brain is simultaneously grieving the friends who vanished while being completely overwhelmed by the ones who won't leave. That's an exhausting place to live. For a brief window in the late 2000s, it felt like the internet might fix this. Old names appearing in notifications carried a genuine electricity, the jolt of recognition, mapping an adult face onto the kid you remembered. But what the algorithm gave you wasn't the person. It was a curated performance of who they'd decided to become. And your brain, which had spent 20 years holding an open loop, quietly waiting for resolution, couldn't close it around a stranger's vacation photos. The grief didn't end. It just changed shape. Because the cruelest feature of the modern social graph is this. It gave you access to people while removing every condition that made friendship possible. Friendship required time, friction, and sustained physical presence. The algorithm replaced all three with a notification. A notification is not the same thing as showing up. Here's what the grief actually tells you about yourself. The depth of feeling that surfaces when a name comes back from 30 years ago isn't dysfunction. It isn't a failure to move on. It's direct evidence of how fully you were present in those relationships when they were happening. You weren't performing. You weren't documenting. You were just there, completely, without a camera, without an audience, without a single metric to justify the experience. That kind of presence is rare now. In a world that's trained people to experience life through a lens, you still carry the memory of what it felt like to live entirely without one. Your dorsal vagal state, the physiological off switch built during thousands of hours of unrecorded adolescence, is still intact. You know that a person's value isn't found in their engagement rate. You know that silence isn't a malfunction. The open loops aren't a problem to solve. They're a record of something real. Nothing went wrong. You loved people the way humans are built to love people, through time, presence, and shared, unremarkable ordinariness. And then life moved, the way life always moves. The grief is just the weight of having been completely real with someone. And for a generation that built itself before the performance, before the feed, before the carefully constructed personal brand, being real with someone was the only way you ever knew how to be. That's not a flaw. That's the whole point. If this pulled something up that you hadn't thought about in a long time, that's exactly why I keep making these. I've read thousands of your comments, and they shape every video we make together. The other videos explore different corners of the same experience. Why you feel older than you are, the friction your brain was built on, and what all of it means for how you live now. Please subscribe and stay in the conversation. Take a breath. You're exactly where you need to be.